Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're watching this from. Welcome back to our next session of the Capital Markets and Investment Day of the LSX World Congress 2021. We've heard so far this morning from McKinsey with their opening presentation, then a focus on Asian investment, and then just now from some corporate venture investors. But now delighted to be having our next panel discussion, which is focused on early stage investment. And I know there's a lot of early stage companies joining us for across the event, who is going to be a lot of great insight from some expert investors from across Europe who are funding the next wave of innovation. Please do keep your questions and chats coming in on the right hand side next to the video that's playing. We'll get to as many questions as we can during the live panel, and indeed we can follow up with any afterwards in the rest of the event. But for now, delighted to hand you over to our moderator for today's discussion, Samana Brannigan. So Samana, the stage is yours.
Okay, well, welcome everyone to this session on accelerating innovation through early stage investment. And I just want to quickly introduce myself. I'm Samana Brannigan. I'm the innovation lead in precision and discovery medicine at Innovate UK. I also look after the investor relations within our team. Just a little bit about Innovate. Innovate UK is a UK innovation agency with an aim to drive productivity and economic growth. And we really support businesses to help them develop their ideas and grow. We are part of UK Research and Innovation, which brings together 9 research and innovation councils and really funds knowledge which would create impact and accelerate innovation. We have a budget of about 7 billion annually. I'd like to welcome the panel today, and I think first of all maybe the best thing is everyone can introduce themselves and tell us a bit about yourself. So maybe I'll start off with Sara.
Okay. Hi, my name is Sara Secall. I'm a partner at Innovate Venture Capital. We're a firm that has been around since 2008, investing in early stage companies, both in IT and biotechnology. Recently added a private equity practice, and we also provide venture debt and convertible bonds for publicly traded companies within Europe. For biotech and IT, we focus most of our investment in equity, in early stage investments, and that's basically what we do. We have over 400 million total assets under management across all these areas that I'm telling you about. And so we're happy to be here. Thanks for the invite, by the way, and I'll be happy to share some more as we go along.
Thank you, Sara. Maybe Thibaut, you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. So hello, everybody. I'm Thibaut Roulon. I'm a senior investment director at BPI France. So BPI France is a French sovereign bank. We are investing and dedicated to the financing of small and medium-sized companies. And we are a team of several tens of people investing actually in startups and innovative companies, and 10 individuals investing in life science companies. So for life science investment, the main fund we manage are the InnoBio and InnoBio2 funds. So those funds are mostly made of private money with pharma companies as LPs. And we invest from C to Series A and Series B, mostly in France, but also in Europe. And we also have another vehicle dedicated to very large investment or investment in public companies. So we are really providing a broad solution of financing for companies in France.
Thank you, Thibaut. That's really good to hear. John, maybe tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm John Cassidy. I'm a principal at Arix Bioscience. Arix is a biotech venture capital group. We're actually publicly listed on the London Stock Exchange, structured as an evergreen balance sheet investor. We've got a team in London, Boston, and Munich, and invest in pretty much the full breadth of biotech. So go from early stage investing in company formation all the way through to late private, so crossover financing ahead of IPO, and can actually invest directly in public companies as well. In no particular therapeutic area focus, pretty broad, same on modalities, typically investing about $5 to $15 million per company per round.
Thank you, John. And Alex, finally, we hear from you.
Hello, everyone. My name's Alex. I've been a partner at Syncona for the last 4 years. Syncona is an evergreen venture capital firm founded by the Wellcome Trust in 2012 with about £250 million of capital. Since then, we listed on the London Stock Exchange in 2016. That raised about a further £500 million, and now we have assets about £1.5 billion under management. Our strategy is to found, build, and fund companies through value creation points, and we aim to retain some of our portfolio all the way to marketed product. Speaking of our portfolio, we have just over 10 biotechnology companies. We are usually the founding investor. We're usually the sole institution at Series A, and we like to take operational and strategic control of the investment at that stage to put it on the path to value creation as quickly as possible. To support this, the typical Series A by us is over about £20 million, and we subsequently invest over multiple rounds to drive companies through to marketed products as quickly as possible. We do focus exclusively on biotech, primarily in therapeutics, but we also look at diagnostics. And ultimately, we seek highly effective products in areas of high unmet medical needs.
Okay, thank you, Alex. It's good, a really good panel for today. I'm really looking forward to our discussion. I think just to start off the discussion, we'll start off with the impact of the pandemic. I mean, obviously, we've been in this position now for quite a while, and we're still in lockdown in most cases. So I just wanted to check in terms of the impact of the pandemic on in terms of your investment. How has the deal making occurred in the virtual world? Do you see benefits which we will maybe hopefully carry forward after the pandemic? What have been the disadvantages in terms of having to do a virtual deal? And are there opportunities that we have, that have been created, which we can take forward? So maybe I'll start off with you, John. Just put you on the spot first. Sure,
no problem. Yeah, no, 2020 was obviously, a very strange year for everybody. I'd say, in biotech investing, probably for most of, the investors, the onset of the pandemic was a moment where we had to kind of pause for thought to understand exactly how things were going to play out. Obviously moving to remote working, not being able to, meet people face to face, and also, I guess, the uncertainty on what would happen in the, financial markets, but also just locally in our own kind of countries and cities, how things might operate. I think our experience was that we, paused or slowed down activity initially. But then over, the summer, late summer, into autumn, ramped back up, and we completed a few deals in the autumn, which were sort of structured in a way where we never actually met the teams and never actually met the companies that we're investing in, which was a brand new experience for us, and I imagine for them as well. So our experience was a brief dip in activity, followed by actually quite a lot of activity. We were also fortunate to have a pretty major exit in our portfolio, the acquisition of Velos Bio by Merck for $2.7 billion. And we owned about 7% of that company, and that has also had a huge impact on our activity and our dry powder. I think the big difference at the moment is that healthcare has shown itself to be a very resilient sector, and that there's a lot of interest, not just from specialist investors, but also from, even just more generalist investors. So you can see that in the public markets in biotech. And, whenever there's effects like this, it always feeds, into the ecosystem at kind of every level. And I think all of the government funding as well has had the same impact, that there's just been a lot of focus on our sector. So for early stage investing, we've actually founded a company in late last year. And we've managed to do that remotely with great difficulty, but with basically, a lot of effort and just continuing contact, face-to-face Zoom calls, things like that. And that is one, amazing thing that's come out of this, is the realization that you can do a lot of these things remotely, even if it's not, perfect and you miss some element of face-to-face contact. It is actually achievable. And so I guess a learning from there is it sort of opens up, I guess, opportunities even more broadly than your local ecosystem. If you can connect with investors who are the other side of the globe, pretty much through the same medium that you're connecting to the ones who are across the city from you, it opens up quite a lot of opportunities to raise money. And we're certainly seeing that with the opportunities that we're seeing. But I'll pause there.
Okay. Well, thank you, John. Everyone else can sort of chip in. Maybe Alex, you want to add anything to that?
Sure. Thanks. So I agree with everything that John said there. Certainly on the deal making front, I think it hasn't been that materially impacted by the pandemic. I think the most relevant point is really the ability to get to know and to build relationships with incumbent management teams. I think the flow of information required for a deal has been electronic for years anyway, and so I don't think that the absence of meeting people in person has impacted that, but certainly that's relationship building element has changed slightly, and I think we're still in quite early days of that, and we're going to have to wait and see how that sort of pans out, because deals generally have quite a long lead time. What I would add are some comments on operations, which is that the pandemic has severely disrupted clinical trials. Medical facilities have struggled to operate. They've deprioritized trial participation, particularly for non-acute diseases, and that has biased capital towards preclinical companies. So I think companies launching and companies seeking to raise capital for the next couple of years towards IND or CTA have been fine. I think the struggle is probably towards people who are actually in the clinic and trying to generate data, and I think that there we're going to see impacts as companies move towards their next value inflection points. But preclinical investment, I think, has gone very well. I suspect that as the pandemic shifts, we will see some reversal of that.
Thank you, Alex. Maybe Sarah, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I guess just one additional thing for us. We've also seen, besides what Alex and John have told so eloquently, we've also seen a slowdown in deal making at the other end, right? So licensing agreements have been lessened. Companies are more skittish to put down a term sheet for some of our assets. So some of the assets that came out ready during 2020 have had a more difficult time than they did, say, in 2019 to reach favorable term sheets or agreements. So I think this will roll over to 2021, unfortunately, and we have to brace up for a period of, I guess, a bit of cash conservation or preservation mode in certain companies, especially those running clinical trials that have been in fact disrupted. And we also at the same time have seen very healthy public and financial markets in general. So I think companies, small companies, the ones that we invest in, need to also keep an eye on what alternative avenues of funding they can get, because certainly the capital markets in biotech have behaved differently. And so there's opportunities for them to, one, preserve cash, but also to raise just in amounts that actually have been bigger than years past.
Thank you. Thibaut, do you want to add to that?
I mean, not to add, but really 2020 was a very strange year. And in the spring, after the first lockdown, I mean, we were all concentrated on our portfolio companies, so everything froze. And we really were trying to analyze, I mean, what is going to be disrupted, and clinical trials have been really very painful for some companies. On the practical side, I mean, really at the real beginning of the lockdown, I mean, everything was blocked. So we had some companies also having issue in the preclinical experiments, but then it went back to a normal. So really, I mean, and then we restarted activities as before, and we've seen very, very large round, either as refinancing or as first financing. And so we are, I would say, back to a normal level operation in a normal setting. Also the thing to mention, but John and Alex already mentioned, that is we're starting to invest in companies without seeing people in real life. I mean, we haven't done it yet. I mean, for all the new investment we did at the end of the year, we had an opportunity to meet people in person. But if the situation persists for a few more months, we may come to a situation when you never met the people physically before doing the investment. And it's going to be all about building the relationship for the 3, 4, 5, 6 years the investment is going to last.
Okay, so it's obviously different. And I think, is there a preference now going forward that we maybe won't do as many face-to-face meetings, considering that we've survived without it to a certain extent? Alex, do you?
Yeah, I think we'll do a lot less face-to-face meetings for regular stuff. I think that face-to-face will very much continue to be a part of new deal origination. But I struggle to see myself flying every quarter over to the US for a board meeting from now on. I think that will happen occasionally, but it's not going to be the same extent of travel that we've had in the past.
Okay, thank you. I mean, just to keep on the pandemic thing, as you know, obviously we've all talked about the importance of the healthcare sector, and it's obviously highlighted the importance of vaccine and antiviral technologies to maybe help us get out of this sort of infectious disease lockdown. Do you think going forward, your area of interest will change? I mean, are you more likely to look at these type of technologies, or is it still where the market is? Do you focus more on the market rather than the technology, or are you going to look at technologies that are obviously going to, in the future, help us deal with pandemics? I'll start off with Sara.
Sure. I guess this was an eye-opener to many of us. This is something that the scientific community had been talking about for a while, and that we disregarded most of us in venture capital and just in society in general. To get to your question, we're always open, and actually I have been in the business for over 8 years now. I've been looking intentionally for companies more in the maybe antibiotic space and also vaccination, but the deal flow has been mainly in the last few years, has been mainly in oncology and immuno-oncology, of course, and so most of the industry has focused there. We've also focused on underlooked diseases with unmet medical needs, dermatology and eye care and what have you. And the fundamentals for any investment have to be there. So I struggle to answer your question because it's a yes and no question. We look at every deal for its own value. And unfortunately, we haven't seen as many deals in vaccine that have been interesting for us to invest and that have fit our very strict investment strategy. So we will continue to look for unmet medical needs and with technologies that are a breakthrough that address those markets that have unmet medical needs. And that just goes across indications. Obviously, we're indication agnostic, as they say. So no, not really. It's a yes and no.
Thibaut, maybe you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, really, before this crisis, I mean, infectious disease and vaccines were very difficult business model, and because, I mean, of course, there was a medical need, but the market was not there, and people were not ready to pay for innovation, I don't know, in vaccine or in anti-infectives. And right now, with this COVID crisis, obviously things have a little bit changed. I would not say they have drastically changed. I mean, before I would say like 1 or 2 years ago, if you had a vaccine or an anti-infective company, it would be almost a no-go for most of the investors. Right now, what I think is that, I mean, when you have really a breakthrough innovation in that field, VC will really consider the opportunity because, I mean, if you succeed, there will be an opportunity on the market in the end. So it's not a total change, I would say, but really a slight change and the door opening for those technologies.
Thank you, Thibaut. John?
Yeah, it's a question that comes up quite a lot, I think, at the moment. And, you know, my answer is always that I think anti-infectives and vaccines are, you know, as Thibaut said, challenging commercially or from a business perspective. And a lot of that is entrenched in the fundamentals of how healthcare systems reimburse these things and how they can be priced. And also, you know, which is related to you know, which pharma companies might be interested in acquiring these companies. You know, investors are somewhat simplistic. We like to see nice comps, meaning other companies that have done something similar that have been acquired for a lot of money. It's really hard to find those for antibiotics and for vaccines. Until that starts happening, from our perspective, you know, it's going to be hard to make the sort of case that it's a good investment early on. I think where you've got something fundamental as a platform technology that could be applied elsewhere, then, you know, the pandemic has been, I guess, a great showcase for, you know, getting government money to sort of develop it for COVID, but with the expectation that there are actually lots of other places you could use that technology. That makes a complete sense, but you could never have predicted that, you know, before the pandemic, and you can't necessarily predict that that will happen again. So from our perspective, you know, the tried and tested areas continue to look the most attractive, like oncology, rare disease, genetic diseases, you know, things like that, immunology. It's much easier to make the case there than anti-infectives, and I completely you know, see the value in those technologies. It's just, you know, if you're an investor, your metric is primarily whether you're providing returns to your, you know, investors and you, and it's very hard to get comfort with that in anti-infectives and vaccines.
Okay, Alex, do you have any further to add to that?
I don't have anything particularly different. I mean, I think we're living in a pretty remarkable time of science, right? And so there's so much innovation across such a wide array of technologies and clinical settings that I think, you know, that there's, do we divert away from that in order to do more infectious disease stuff? I think probably not. And so the question becomes, do you add more infectious disease on top of what you're already doing? And, you know, the others have spoken about vaccines and antimicrobial resistance, and I agree with what's been said there. I think the vaccine space was already challenging for startups, because you're ultimately, usually you're going to, you know, once you're stable on market, you're going to be signing into a primary care setting, which is very challenging for a small company. That really is big pharma territory. But the other thing I would say about vaccines is that these vaccines that we've got seem to have worked incredibly well. And so it seems to me that the people who have succeeded here, guys like Moderna and BioNTech, actually have it locked up. Do we need more vaccine innovation? You know, it's not clear to me that we do until the next pathogen comes along, but we don't know what that's going to be. So how do you prepare for it? The one space we haven't spoken about on this panel is antivirals. So I think antivirals, we don't have anything in our portfolio on antivirals, but I think it's an interesting space. The challenge with antivirals really is identifying indications where you can feasibly perform a clinical trial. As we've seen with SARS-CoV-2, these things tend to come in waves, which can make it very difficult to operate trials, because by the time that you've entered the clinic, you're down the curve again, and you can't recruit people anymore. So there's a bias there clearly towards diseases that are endemic in the developed world. So HIV, Hep B and stuff. So those remain attractive. But, you know, think about Hep C. Investment in Hep C has collapsed, but that's because it's essentially been cured. And so there is the risk as you go into these markets that actually they just disappear because somebody else nails it before you do.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think just sort of moving on from the types of investment, I think obviously we talked about how funding in biotech has initially, after the initial dip, it did it to recover. I think BIA published a report, there was 2.8 billion equity investment in the UK biotech sector last year. So obviously we've been doing really well. What do you think are the key drivers behind it? I mean, I think also I want to understand how the availability of funding in Europe, across Europe and the EU has changed in the past decade for biotech. You know, early stage investment, has it improved? And what type of, how do you choose your winners? Maybe I'll start with John.
Sure. Yeah. So there's a couple of questions in there. I think in terms of, the level of investment in 2020, through the pandemic, etc. I guess one important thing to understand is that we're coming off the back of a few really good years in biotech. 2018 was a blowout year, which, people thought would be difficult to top again. And yet we've done it this year. But those kinds of trends and, M&A and the public markets, those drive interest in putting money into the sector. And then VC funds, for example, raise money, over a period of months. And many of them were already well underway with their fundraising when the pandemic hit. So there were a number of notable large funds that were raised, during 2020, many of which probably had most of their commitment before we knew about the scale of the pandemic. So there was already a lot of money flowing into the sector anyway, just based on the performance in, the last sort of 5 years. And then there's been a lot of money flowing in from governments as well, to fund and support ecosystems and research and manufacturing and allowing people to build out capabilities. And then there's been a load of money flowing in from just generalist investors, who see this as a kind of counter-cyclical, safe haven for investment. So it's kind of the confluence of all of those things combined that, has led us to this bizarre year in investment in biotech or healthcare more broadly. I think over the last decade, there's no doubt there's been a huge increase in the availability of, risk capital or, early stage funding. I think, somebody mentioned earlier that, there's been, months in this year which have had more activity than whole years did, just sort of 5-10 years ago. So I think there's a huge improvement in the availability of that. And I think that is, having a pretty important impact on the ecosystems around Europe, with these early stage companies popping up. And I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but incubators, accelerators, all of those things, all of that feeds off the fact that there's just so much more cash available now. In fact, from investor perspectives, we often think there's too much cash. And that it's all chasing the same deals and the same ideas and pushing up valuations, which is, I guess, the flip side of what many of the people watching the panel will be thinking about. But it's something that keeps us up at night, I would say.
Okay, Sarah, do you want to add something to John's comments?
No, I fully agree with what he says. I would just stress that in an environment of a pandemic that was where the public in general got educated as to what it means to develop a vaccine or any therapeutic for that matter. In a year with negative interest rates, which raise the capital available and then raise liquidity for these assets. And with the particularity of biotech investments, which are anti-cyclical, you have a perfect combination for money to flow this way. So I guess I'm just stressing the points that John made. I fully agree with it, and we'll see some shakeout eventually, I guess. At this point, I'm not sure it is sustainable, right? So
I just have a question from the audience as well, asking something similar in terms of the trends for larger Series A investment. Will this continue? Will large syndicates, whether this will continue? Maybe anyone wants to jump in and talk about that.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and it's something that people have noticed over the last couple of years. The number of $100 million Series A's is increasing, or was previously unheard of, and now there's multiple every year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a function of the fact that there's so much money around and concentration on the top tier deals. People want to invest thing, and they would rather put more money into what they think is a winner than spread it out over, you know, one winner and a couple which are just okay. So people are, you know, doubling down, and you know, that's great for the companies that can raise it, but it leads to a bit of a you know, inequality. You get a bit of the 1% in biotech taking home, you know, however much, a big chunk of the winnings, and then everyone else kind of scrambling for the rest. So it's definitely something that I think we'll see more of.
Thibaut and Alex, do you want to add any further to?
Yeah, sure. I think we should stress that the biotech ecosystem in Europe has already changed within 10 years. I mean, when you consider all those very large Series A or Series B now, it was almost impossible to raise such large fund 10 years ago. I mean, like in 12 or 13, I mean, like a 20 or 30 million Series A was a real exception. Right now, it's something you would see very commonly. And that's a sign of maturation, because I mean, the management team are getting more experience, the VC, I think, also are getting more experience. And together with that, we have all the central bank pouring money into the system. So this money has to invest somewhere. And you see that LPs are more kind into investing in venture capital. So you see those like 400, 500, 600 million euros VC fund, which you would never see 10 years ago. I mean, 10 years ago, a large fund was between 100 and 200 million. So really there is a chance for the best, but the limit is the one John mentioned earlier. I mean, for the top deals, there is some competition. There is high valuation, you bring a lot of money. So in order to make your return on investment, you really need to have a strong exit. So from an M&A perspective, I mean, you have a few, but you don't have tens of $1 billion exit in a year for your European company. So it could last as long as the NASDAQ environment is very bullish. And now you see it very bullish. If one day it stops, then maybe all those very large deals at high valuation will change.
I think I have a question from the audience. I'm trying to sort of work out. I think the question is, biotech innovation has decelerated in countries like Germany and France compared to the UK, where it's still growing strong. Any reasons for this? I'm not sure what they're talking about in terms of investment or in terms of innovation.
So I could try to answer, at least for the French part. I mean, that's not what we observe. I mean, we see a lot of company formation, a lot of successful fundraising. So we think there is still a lot of innovation in France. There is a lot of financing. The ecosystem as the European one is maturing. I mean, what we really need, I think, in France, and what was observed in Benelux and UK, for instance, is very large and successful exit. I mean, we have not yet been able to create a multi-billion-dollar company. So that's what we should try to do in the next few years.
Okay, thank you. I think just we'll move on from the topic of investment to maybe talent and skills. So just to make sure that do we have the right skills available for startups, which will give investors confidence in sort of supporting the teams that are coming forward with innovation? I mean, how can we improve this position? I think I just want to talk around maybe how you feel about the local innovation clusters and also the accelerators that help companies develop their ideas. What do you think are the skills we maybe are missing? I mean, we start with John. Or,
yeah, sure.
With John for most things.
Yeah, I think, you know, when we're talking about how many good ideas or good companies there are out there, the science and technology is a pretty important piece, but actually the team and the entrepreneurs or the management behind it is equally, and in some cases more important. And that is probably one of the areas which is the most challenging in Europe compared to, say, you know, Boston or the Bay Area, is the, you know, do we have the density of an ecosystem to provide, you know, both the expertise, but also the sort of stability and safety net for people to take those risks and know that there's just plenty of other, you know, early stage biotechs around that they can go into if you know, the one they're working on doesn't pan out for whatever reason. I think quite often in Europe, the missing piece for us when we're looking at a deal is the sort of leadership or team or management and experience there. So I think that's still an area we definitely need to improve on, but there are definitely examples of, you know, high quality incubators and accelerators and, you know, areas like the Babraham and, you know, around Cambridge biotech, you know, cluster, places like that where you're starting to get to kind of, I guess, a critical threshold. But I think we're still some way behind the US on that front. And it's a, you know, a really important thing that we do need to focus on. Actually, I mean, you know, to one extent, that's why it's important as well to attract the right earlier if you can, because some of them can provide a lot of that operational support. And, you know, as Alex was saying, you know, some of these investors get very involved and basically fill that gap until you can find someone else to take it on. So it's important to think about these things right at the beginning before you know, started talking to your TTO or your tech transfer, you know, start thinking, are you actually going to make this work if you want to make it into an individual company rather than just, you know, out licensing something.
Thank you. Thibaut, maybe you want to add more to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a very very large topic. So, I mean, regarding the teams, of course, I mean, they are the core of an investment thesis. So we really need experienced people for managing startups in the life science field. We need people that know how to develop a product and how to develop a company. And we're starting to have those people, but it's always tricky to have, for example, in an early stage company. So what we are trying to do at BPI France, for instance, we are currently working on a startup studio, and there should be an official announcement in the next few weeks or months. And the object would be for the studio to create to analyze a lot of projects and to be able, with a very strong and experienced team within the startup studio, to do all the killers experiment on the structuration of probably 5-6 companies out of 100 projects. And with that, we hope we will be able to have very well built early stage companies. I mean, other investors do that with in-house venture partners. But we hope that with this model, I mean, we will be able to really create the next breakthrough companies. Regarding the attraction of talents, in the end, of course, it has always been difficult in Europe versus the US to attract those talents because we don't have the same clusters. And as John was mentioning, I mean, when you are in Boston or in San Francisco, I mean, the day you leave a company, I mean, you can find another one the next day. So, and that's, you need that kind of critical mass in order to attract people and to maintain a large enough ecosystem. So, yeah, for that, you need to have active R&D, pharma R&D in Europe. So we really need to work on keeping the R&D center of most or some of the European pharma in Europe. I mean, that's key for the future of our industry. And the good things that also may come out of the current COVID crisis is that there may be an opportunity to attract European people that are in the US to bring them back into Europe. And also, when you consider that now we are all home working, I mean, probably 2 years ago, if I had a talent from another country in Europe, I would have asked him to move to France or to Germany or wherever the company was. Right now, we're seeing that, I mean, doing homework 3-4 days a week can be a solution on the long term. So this may help people moving from one company to another because the cluster will be much larger in Europe. So in the end, I mean, once things are back to more normal situation, this crisis may have been an opportunity for our ecosystem.
I think just a question from the audience is about what are the measurable criteria to assess high quality management teams? Do you have a criteria that you look at? I think maybe Sara, do you want, Sara or Alex, maybe you want to?
Yeah, I'll jump into that. Coming from more of an emerging biotech market, if I may say, in Spain, I'll just give you a few figures here. We're 100 million investment in Catalonia, the area where I'm at, per year. 10 years ago, there was like maybe 10. 10 years ago, there were like 2 specialized small venture capital firms specializing in focusing in Spain in early stage deals, very small funds because the ecosystem wasn't there, the pipeline wasn't there. Fast forward 10 years and you have international investors coming. Somebody asked on the chat whether we saw activity from not across Europe, which we've seen, but also outside of Europe. Yes, just recently one of our companies got an investment from a Chinese pharmaceutical company. So we've gotten companies that have gotten investments from American companies. So these are things that have happened in the last 5 years, and you just need, at least for an emerging ecosystem, somebody who's not mirroring itself with San Francisco or San Diego, because we're at a very different levels. But maybe we're comparing ourselves with our European partners, Belgium, the Netherlands, France, if you push me. You just need to let the ecosystem develop, and it doesn't happen overnight. So as it takes to talent, I'm a big fan of local talent, and the reason I'm saying so is that you have to have people that understand the ecosystem and do have the connections, the proper connections within where they're operating, for example, and that just takes time. Again, we just had the first generation, I guess, of local serial entrepreneurs. That doesn't happen overnight. You have to have your first company and your first exit to then start your second. It's very hard to entice somebody from elsewhere to do that. Some of these folks have done it really because they wanted to bring something into Spain and bring experience that they had developed elsewhere. That has happened across, with academics, with doctors, medical doctors, and key opinion leaders, and also with financiers and entrepreneurs. So that takes time. I see an evolution for the better, for sure. I'm very glad to see the first generation of serial entrepreneurs in Spain. That just takes time and patience. It's not an overnight business. What do I look for when you think about talent? Experience. If you have been in industry before, if you know what a pharmaceutical company looks forward to when they're looking at results, and so that's what I'm looking for. But I'm also looking at greed, in a sense, or ambition. The ambition to drive things forward and to be able to develop alternatives, because your clinical trial might fail, and that's just a fact. You might have designed it very well, but that's why we do science. But people that have lateral skills that can think of options and bring optionality to the investor, that's something that I definitely look forward to.
Okay, thank you. I think just sort of to move on, and I think we have a question someone has asked, do you see more US or Asian investors looking at early stage European companies? Alex, do you have any?
I think we do. I'm probably not the best person to answer this because most of our work is Series A spin out, which we do ourselves. But as we syndicate our companies out through Series B, C, crossover, IPO, yes, we get a lot of interest from American investors.
Just in terms of, I know this is Brexit, I mean, do you see any impact from that going forward? Or, I mean, I think most of you maybe invest everywhere anyway as it's international. Do you see an impact? Maybe Thibaut, maybe I can ask you that.
I would say we don't see an impact yet. We would still consider investing in a UK company if we think it's really a good investment thesis, with a caveat that we mostly do investment in France. So we don't have such an active deal flow work in the UK. We still see UK investors we know investing in European and French companies, so it hasn't changed. And in the end, I think once things will be back to normal, it's not going to be a huge matter. So I would say I don't think it's going to change much at this stage.
Yeah, I think maybe just a final question that I have is, I mean, obviously I work for government and we want to really help early stage companies to grow. I mean, do you see what further thing is needed from government to improve the growth of the industry. I think from Innovate side, we do grant funding, but we also do a partnership where we co-fund with investors. What is happening in your country? I mean, maybe you can start off with Thibaut, that is helping your startups.
So the French institution have been trying to develop early stage investment for several years and back to almost for more than 10 years. Really, there are a lot of incentives right now for entrepreneur and academic funders. So there are a lot of non-dilutive financing. You have the research tax credit, which is used for early stage, but for all kinds of companies, and this is very an attractive way of non-dilutive financing. And then for early stage product, we also have initiative like competition for early stage project even before a company is actually created, so that the company can mature. So right now, for us, I mean, the bottleneck is really to have like founders, teams, people maturing those projects into companies. And back to the startup studio I was mentioning a few minutes ago, it's really having experienced entrepreneur, building the company, and doing the killer experiment with the first few 100K you're raising from seed money and those non-dilutive financing. And with that, you should be able to build a company. But really, I mean, globally, all the governments are pouring a lot of money into the innovation. So I don't think we really miss a lot on that. And it's about maturing the project. And also another debate we could have, but it's much larger than that, would be towards the financing of the academic lab, which is becoming a bit tricky. And we should remember that most of the company we finance come from an academic environment. And if we don't finance those academics, then in 5 or 10 years, we may have an issue.
Well, Alex, do you want to add anything more to that?
Sure. So I would echo Thibaut's comments on the R&D tax credit. I'm most familiar with the UK system. The big advantage of it, well, there's a few big advantages of it, but one of the biggest things about it is it's actually really simple. You claim it in arrears, so capital doesn't get unproductively deployed on companies that go nowhere, and it's just quite a light touch thing to be able to do. So we're big fans of that here at Syncona. We also take advantage of Innovate UK grants within our portfolio companies rather than to help seed new ones. We found that these grants are really effective for bringing forward a work stream that we would otherwise pursue later in development, or it's good for exploring the feasibility of applying a technology in a new domain that isn't core to the strategy today, but could represent an exciting area of expansion. They are a little bit more administratively burdensome, but it is capital up front in many cases, and so that can change the dynamic a bit. I think one area where governments, generally speaking, could play a major role is in the provision of infrastructure. I think certainly the cell and gene therapy catapult in the UK has been a major success, and we could explore other things along those lines. We do find locating growing space to be a constant challenge. There's plenty of lab space in the UK, but that may only be for 5 or 10 scientists at a time. So that's fine for the first 6 months, but once you get to a company of about 40 people or more, you really need more space, and that is a real challenge in the UK, particularly as London and the southeast is just so expensive. We have companies in White City in London. We have them in Steve. We have them in Oxford. This is quite expensive space, and it's quite difficult to scale. And it'd be nice to have more options and more facilities that are capable of supporting these businesses as they go through that sort of headcount expansion from sort of 30 to 100 people is kind of where we're seeing a significant need that I think the government could step in and help with.
If I may just add a point, if you don't mind, Samana,
go ahead.
this is sort of an issue that's very dear to me, but if I were to stress one thing, and obviously I'm coming from Southern Europe, but the main thing that governments and states can do just in general is support academic research. I could stress that more. At least here in Spain, we went from 1.7% of GDP at the peak, this is 10 years ago, to substantially lower. The mean in Europe is 2%. And we really need to make sure that that academic research keeps on coming, because that's the source of all of these innovations. So governments have done a lot as far as, tax credits here in Spain. The system is very, it's very attractive. They've done a lot with matching funds, non-dilutive funding. All of those are very good tools, and they have to stay there. I think if I were to ask for one thing, is to increase the amount of money that's put into basic research.
Okay, well, I would like to thank everyone for all your time, and I think we've had a few more questions that have been submitted, and I think we will maybe try and answer them afterwards. I will now hand back to Josh, and thank you again to the panel for your time today, and it's been a very interesting discussion. Thank you, Josh. Back to you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Samana. Yeah, as Samana said, we did have a number of questions come through on the platform. Thank you very much for those. We're not able to get to them as our next session is starting in 10 minutes. But Mel, Swetang, Raj, thank you for your questions. We'll look to get to them in the platform itself over the text and the chat and Q&A functions. But yeah, huge thank you to our panel this morning, to Samana as our moderator, to Thibaut, Alex, John and Sara. A lot of themes there which we're actually continuing on with some other discussions today. So our panel later on focuses on infectious disease and if COVID is going to affect the investment and partnering landscape, hearing from some companies who are active in the space and a little bit towards the commercialization process. In 9 minutes, we have our panel focused on the IPO topic and have a number of recent case studies of those who have made the leap to NASDAQ through various different means. And then following on at 4 o'clock, our investment panel with a global perspective, a little bit more on the growth stage. But a huge thank you to all our panel for sharing those insights. Please do keep the comments and questions coming in, and we can look to answer them in the platform. And see you all again in just under 10 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you.